Hi, and welcome to the Hemophilia Federation of America, HFA's Young Adults Hangout series. My name is Sarah Shinkman. I am the Advocacy and Outreach Manager for HFA. I also do a lot of work with our Young Adults program, specifically focusing around advocacy. This series is intended for young adult, male and female, members of the bleeding disorders community between the ages of 18 and 30. We hope this information will help you better advocate for yourself and others, as well as provide an opportunity to share your experiences and connect with others. A little background on our Hangout series. We started these about 3 years ago, and they were intended to cover a variety of topics relating to young adults. Our past Hangouts have included how to advocate, dating and relationships, living with pain, traveling with a bleeding disorder, inhibitors, and much more. To find our past Hangouts, go to HFA's YouTube channel, or you can check them out on our website at hemophiliafed.org. For tonight's Hangout and the last Hangout of our 2017 series, we'll be focusing on business basics, the do's and don'ts for career success. Professionalism is key to landing and sustaining a job, regardless of what sector you are in and in your position. Knowing application basics, how to dress for an interview and in the office, and how to communicate with colleagues will help you on your career path as you achieve success. Tonight, we'll review tips and tricks to benefit young adults, whether you're applying for an internship or a leadership position, as well as share employment resources available within the bleeding disorders community. For those who are participating on the live webinar, feel free to share your own experiences as well as ask questions. Speaking of which, all attendees' lines are muted. To ask a question, please use the question box to the right of the screen or raise your hand in the toolbar and I'll unmute your line. We'll answer questions at the end of the presentation. As a reminder, this presentation is not direct medical advice. It is intended to share experiences of people living with bleeding disorders. Please go to an HTC or healthcare provider with questions. Also, thanks to our funders, Shire, CVS Specialty, and CSL Behring for their support of this Hangout series. Now, I'll introduce our speaker, Elizabeth DeGrandpré. A little bit more on Elizabeth. She currently lives in Southern Maryland and works at St. Mary's College as the Assistant Director of Student Activities. There, she oversees orientation programming, leadership development, and collaborates with community partners while focusing on creating a welcoming and inclusive environment for students. Prior to her work at St. Mary's, Elizabeth was the coordinator for campus life at Sheridan College in Sheridan, Wyoming. There, she developed a comprehensive online career services website called Career Cafe for students, staff, and faculty. Elizabeth also assisted in creating a professional development series for campus life and housing student leaders. Elizabeth received her master's in counseling with a specialization in student development and higher education at Central Connecticut State University. She is originally from Maine. So now I'm going to turn it over to Elizabeth, who will go over her presentation, and then I'll come back to me and I'll share some more information specific to resources for the bleeding disorders community. Okay, bear with us now while I turn the presentation over to Elizabeth.
Hello, everyone. Hold on a moment while I switch the screen over. All right, excellent. Thank you, Sarah, very much for that introduction. Again, my name is Elizabeth DeGrandpré, and I'm looking forward to speaking with you all through this webinar tonight around professionalism with the bleeding disorder community. I also had the opportunity to present this past April at the symposium in Providence, Rhode Island, to talk about career development and career exploration. And I also have a connection to the HFA bleeding disorder community through my brother-in-law. So it's a pleasure to be able to have this opportunity to come back and be able to conduct this webinar with you all tonight. So without further ado, let's jump right in. So All right, so today the main topic is around professionalism. It's a really big word, and it's not just one thing. It's a combination of qualities. Some people, when they think of professionalism, they might think about someone wearing a suit or carrying a briefcase. But what I want you to do is think a little bit differently. What I want you to think about professionalism as being is a means to conducting oneself with responsibility, integrity, accountability, and excellence. There's a great national association that I refer to often through my research and resources, and that's NACE, which stands for National Association of Colleges and Employers. It's a great resource that I recommend you all to take a look at as well as you navigate through your professionalism process. And they talk about ways to demonstrate professionalism. And listed here, I have some of those key pieces. First off, it's having personal accountability, having effective working habits, so punctuality, working effectively with others and being productive in working with others. Being able to manage your time and your workload is really important with that. Another way to demonstrate is having an understanding of the impact of nonverbal communication on your professional work image. That's really important. Integrity, ethical behavior, responsible actions with the interest of the larger community in mind. So it's really important that you're thinking about the overall company or community that you're working for, and having the ability to learn from mistakes. Taking responsibilities for your own behavior is extremely important. Another few points to add to that is it also means communicating effectively and appropriately, and we'll talk a lot about that today or tonight, and then also dressing appropriately for the job. So those are all pieces we'll cover throughout this presentation. So where should we be professional? There are many different settings, but some of them are in interviews, in your working environment, at conferences, in the classroom, or when attending organization meetings and events. So we're going to jump right into communication. Communication is so important when it comes to professionalism. And we're going to talk about nonverbal, verbal, and written communication throughout this. So we'll jump into nonverbal communication. It is important to remember that communication happens in many different forms. So only 7% is verbal. 93% of communication is nonverbal. The nonverbal component is made up of two different things. One is body language, which we're going to talk about now, and that's 55%, whereas the tone of your voice is 38%. So body language is more powerful than the spoken word. Stop and take a minute to think, what first impression do you think people have when you go to work, class, when you're at a conference or in an internship? And if you've never stopped to think about what first impression you have, maybe ask a colleague or a friend or a coworker to find out, how are they perceiving you? What was their first impression? Because if it wasn't as positive or aligning with how you feel you're being perceived, that gives you an opportunity to stop and think on how to improve that first impression. Some examples of body language are your gestures, your posture, your movement, facial expressions, and eye contact. If you're not aware of this or in control of your body language, your nonverbal communication, you may be unintentionally distracting in your approach or even undermining your credibility. Nonverbal communication should be natural. So what's important is that you're intentional with your gestures, with your eye contact, with your posture. And it's really important to be authentic, be genuine, be natural in your approach. So just be you, but also be mindful of how you're conducting yourself. And determine what you instinctively do when you're communicating at your best and most relaxed, and continue to practice that. The do's and don'ts with nonverbal communication: do smile, make eye contact, talk with your hands. It's okay, but be mindful of talking too much with your hands. And when in doubt, if you're unsure in a situation of what to do, you can always mirror someone. but it's really important that if you're mirroring someone, you're being subtle. So if somebody moves to cross their legs, the person you're talking to, you can do so, but don't do it right away. Maybe wait a couple seconds and then do the same. Things not to do: you don't want to be defensive or sloppy in your posture, gestures. So no crossing your arms. Slouching when you're communicating can show a lack of energy and confidence, so be mindful of that. You don't want to do flimsy handshakes or invade someone else's space. Another piece with nonverbal communication that sometimes people might not connect with is your attire. Impressions are often made on the basis of very minimal information. So before you even say a few words, it's evident that the body language speaks volumes. But even before that, your attire can prime an individual's opinion for you. So professional dress standards differ from office to office, so it's important to know that. But when approaching a job or an interview, it's best to always be over-prepared and dress up for the occasion than be under-prepared and not dress for the occasion. So dress more formally and conservative your first day. And when you're there in your first day of work, you can always observe what your peers are wearing, and they can help you decipher what is appropriate attire. It's also completely okay to ask what the appropriate attire is as well. Some positions also require you to wear a uniform. Typically, that's something you're going to know ahead of time, but if that is a piece or a requirement to the position, then that's something that a supervisor or boss should make you aware of. Things to be mindful, or things that you can wear or are beneficial to wear or be thinking about, is clothing that's neutral, dark, or light colors. It should be well fitted and clean. You don't want to be wearing holes or have wrinkles in your clothing. Jewelry should be kept simple. A clean and maintained facial hair, nails, hair, all of that is important. Light and neutral makeup is also important. And then you want to avoid any strong perfume or cologne. So some organizations actually are moving to a scent-free environment, so that's something that you're going to also be mindful of as well. Here's a great little chart that hopefully can help you out a little bit about attire. So for myself and my role and my position, I typically wear business casual, but there are certain opportunities or events or days where business professional is most appropriate. Typically, that's a conversation that my boss and I have, or I look at my calendar ahead of time and understand certain days when I'm supposed to be dressing up more. So when you're looking at business casual, examples for tops is like a button down, a polo, a blouse, or a sweater. For bottoms, khakis, dress pants, a skirt or dress is great. For shoes, you can wear flats, simple heels, or nice sandals. Loafer style shoes are great. Relatively conservative shoes is a good way to approach that. And for accessories, scarves, jewelry, socks, and belts are all great. You know, if they can match the outfit, even better. With business professional attire, this is typically what you would wear in an interview setting or more of a formal type event. So your top is like a jacket with button down or a blouse. For your bottom, you're going to wear dress pants or a skirt are options. For shoes, plain heels or flats are okay. Closed-toed shoes are recommended. The simpler the style, the plainer the colors, the better. You don't want something so vibrant that it's going to take away from you and what you're presenting and how you're presenting yourself. And then for accessories, socks, ties, and belts should match outfit. Your stockings should be neutral, and you don't want to have any runs in your stockings as well. Simple jewelry as well is important. So that's just a basic overview of attire that you can wear. There's some flexibility with that depending on the role and the position, but it's really important to be mindful of that attire piece. So what not to wear? Generally speaking, these are items not to wear, but sometimes certain items are appropriate for jobs. So in general, you don't want to be wearing tennis shoes or flip-flops, gym shorts, cargo pants, jeans, or t-shirts. In my past experiences, I did AmeriCorps for a couple of years. In one of my jobs, it was completely fine for me to wear t-shirt and jeans and tennis shoes to work. But that was something that my boss communicated to me after I'd started there. So I started off wearing khakis and a polo and nice shoes, but then I was told that we can wear more relaxed clothing. Although on some days when I was meeting with donors or outside community members, I was required to dress up a little bit more to make sure that I was representing the nonprofit in the correct manner. So moving on to verbal communication. So more college students, or more people in general, send text messages than place phone calls today. But it's really important to know that phone calls are just as important when navigating the job search process and networking and around professionalism. So there's a statistic that 94% of students say they text every day, and 73% of students say they make phone calls every day. And we're talking more about the general college student population. So in thinking of those statistics, some general tips to keep in mind is that you want to be using proper language in thinking about professionalism. When you answer a phone, you don't want to just say hello. Instead, you could say something like, hello, this is Elizabeth. And when you're saying goodbye, you don't want to just say, yeah, bye-bye. Say goodbye, enunciate what you're saying throughout the conversation. You want to make sure your voicemail is professional. Be aware of your surroundings. If you are talking on the phone and it is extremely loud all around you, go find a quiet place to have your conversation so that's not distracting. And then don't text unless you've been given permission to do so by your employer, or that's something that's accepted within the group that you are in. Always place that phone call first. As just a side note, if you're ever in a phone interview, something that I would recommend is, since so many people today have cell phones, that's what people tend to use. If your only option is to use a cell phone in a phone interview or in a phone conversation, informational interview, whatnot, make sure that your phone is charged and that you're in a good service area. And if you're unsure about that, then my best advice is to find a landline if possible, so that you are going to have a good connection and you don't have to worry about your phone dying or battery or lost connection or anything like that. So another piece with verbal communication is active listening. So we speak at a rate, I thought this was very interesting. So we speak at a rate of 225 words per minute, but we comprehend up to 500 words per minute. So even more, we can often think faster than someone else can speak. So when we listen to the average speaker, we're only using 25% of our mental capacity. So that actually leaves 75% for us to do something else. So the question is, what are we doing with all that extra time? Well, sometimes we're thinking about how to respond when we should really be listening. Understanding employers and professionals in the workplace will do the same. And so thinking about that, it's so important to start your conversations with people with the most relevant information first, because you want to make sure that you're capturing them at the time they're going to be listening best. So with that, do's and don'ts, you want to limit your talking, or so for you do want to limit your talking. You want to make sure that you're focusing on the speaker as they're talking and ask open-ended questions. Do your best to ignore distractions. This is something that sometimes it takes practice to ignore distractions, or being mindful of where you're placing yourself or what you're doing to eliminate distractions. Often people start thinking of ideas or other things while someone is talking, and it's so important to stop yourself and focus back on what the speaker is actually saying. Do your best to be attentive but relaxed, and then keep an open mind through the conversation. You don't want to ever interrupt. You don't want to show signs of impatience. So an example could be fidgeting. You don't want to be multitasking during a conversation. If you're someone who has a smartwatch like I do, it can be very easy to get distracted when you're talking to someone, when all of a sudden you get a message popping up or some type of notification or your phone goes off or whatnot. So do your best to limit that so that you're not multitasking in your conversation. You don't want to judge or argue mentally. You don't want to think what to say next. And then you don't want to ignore the nonverbal communications that's happening between you and the person you're speaking with. Sometimes that's the best way to know what's going on, how to read the situation, and how to read the reaction of the person you're speaking with, and if you might need to make adjustments when talking with them. All right, so continuing with verbal communication, networking. Networking can be such an intimidating word to hear, but really what you're doing is crafting your introduction. When you're thinking about crafting your introduction or where you might be using that, it could be in an interview, it could be in a networking opportunity, it might be at some different conferences. You never know when someone might ask you to tell them about yourself. And that's essentially the basis of what networking is. When you're going through your conversation and you're talking to someone, they say, tell me about yourself. You want to be prepared to answer that question in all of those different situations and scenarios. Remember that as you're holding that conversation, you're not leading all of the conversation, that you're also asking those open-ended questions for them to respond as well. And when you're done with the conversation or wrapping up, if you've had that beneficial conversation, you've really enjoyed it, or no matter what, don't hesitate to ask for a business card or ask some type of question so that there's follow-up happening. And my tip is, right after that, when you get a business card from someone and you have a moment, flip it over, grab a pen, and write down the basis of the conversation you had with that person and any follow-up information that you discussed with them, so that when you contact them later on with that thank you note or that follow-up email, which we'll get to later in this presentation, you can refer back to the conversation. And really the biggest thing with networking is practice, practice, practice. Practice with anyone that you can, any opportunity that you get, to really hone in on how you're going to answer that question of tell me about yourself. And lastly, with networking, another piece I would say, never assume that one person is more important than another, and never undermine a conversation. There have been so many opportunities that I've had where after, I'll be attending a conference, and at the end of the conference one of the conference presentations I've been to, I've gone up at the end and talked to the presenter and just said, tell me about yourself. I've asked that exact question that I've said to you all now. And I've just had them tell me their story and how they got to where they are. And it's ended up resulting in getting me different job offers and opportunities because of those networking opportunities I've taken advantage of. And even though at the time, in the moment, when I've done these things, I've had no idea the benefit or what, if that person could be a benefit to me in having that conversation. Ultimately, in one shape or another, 9 times out of 10, it turns out to be a conversation that really helps. So be mindful of that as well with networking. So we're moving on now to written communication. Email is used so often these days. And so it's important to take the time to stop and think about what email should be used for. So it should be used for exchanging information, maybe clarifying information, following up on a conversation, and then anything around company or university property. The biggest thing to be mindful of is that emails are not a substitute for face-to-face dialogue. That still is extremely important. Sometimes the tone in an email can be misconstrued, can create some type of debate or negative reaction or response. And it can hinder your opportunity to be able to progress or take action or move forward in a conversation. So it's really important to be mindful of the tone that's coming across via email. And when in doubt, if that exchange is going back and forth and there's confusion in that, don't hesitate to pick up the phone and call the person or set up a meeting to follow up with that conversation. I just did that this past week at work. I was having an email conversation back and forth. The other person and I were not matching in our communication style. And I said, you know what? Tomorrow, let's set up a half-hour meeting. Let's chat face-to-face. And that was the best thing I could have ever done. We had a phenomenal meeting. We got on the same page, and we were able to get any issues we had resolved and are now going to be much more productive moving forward. So that's important to think about. The other thing too is when emailing people, know that that is a main line of communication these days. So you want to make sure to put your message clear in the subject, get to the point of what the email really is about, and then in your communication just stating the facts of what you're looking for, and make sure there's some type of follow-up with that of like, what are you trying to get out of this email communication, so the person is clear on whether they need to respond or not moving forward. When you're writing to a supervisor or a faculty member, something to keep in mind is to use formal title until you're requested to use the first name, if that's ever requested. Include pleasantries and explanations, even when responding to one-word emails. The exception is that if you're going back and forth in an email on the same day or around the same day, by the third email, you usually can drop that greeting if the other person has done so. With email, conversations from texting and social media should not be used in email. So you want to start it off with dear or hello instead of hey. You want to use respectful titles like Mr., Miss, Doctor, Professor when contacting someone for the first time. And make sure that you're using the respectful title of that person until told otherwise. Include a short pleasantry. So I hope your week is off to a good start, or I wanted to check in about so-and-so. Avoid using any emojis or internet slang like LOL. Invite input or feedback, so you can say, hopefully this captures what we discussed. Let me know if I missed anything. And also make sure you proofread. Always proofread your emails before you send them out. I don't know how many times I mix up letters or do uppercase where I'm not supposed to. So it's really important to proofread. In that subject line, the person should get a general idea of what the email says by reading the subject line before they even read it. So be intentional in what you're putting there. And if you're putting any attachments, make sure that you're also mindful of what you're naming your attachment. So if you're attaching a resume, you don't want to write my resume. A recommendation would be to maybe put your last name and then type what the document is. For example, I could put de Grand Prix resume and then attach that. And then put yourselves in the shoes of the recipient and anticipate their needs. So if they, so as you're writing that email, be mindful of what are their needs going to be? Are there things that I need to include in this email for some people versus others? Because of how they read and how they communicate via email. So communication overall is key. It's so important, and it's all pieces of it. I know that I really talked about the body language piece, but the tone is so important. The written communication is so important. So all the nonverbal, verbal, and written communication pieces together really create that robust, the robust form of communication with any parties that you're interacting with, whether it's a new employer, current employers, potential employers, all really, really important. And so the next piece following with communication is that follow-up. So I referenced at one point about the thank you note. So a good thank you note should always include a thank you to the individual. You want to remind them how they know you. You want to refer back to the conversation you've had with them. You want to describe what you plan to do or have already done based off the conversation, and then close with restating your appreciation. So when I talked about collecting the business cards and writing down references to the conversation, that is a great this is when you can use that tip in writing the thank you note. You can just have the business cards lined up, and as you're writing the thank you note, you can pull in reminding them how they know you and referring to the conversation. What thank you notes do is they help you stand out against others who have maybe not written a note. It can help you develop longer lasting connections that you can draw on later. Like I talked about in the networking piece, I went up to a woman at the end of a presentation and we talked. I asked her, tell me about yourself. I got her business card. I followed up with a thank you note. And then she was one of the reasons why I was able to get a graduate internship in my grad school program, because I created that. I started and followed through with developing that longer lasting connection. Thank you notes can help you grow your network. And if you don't write a thank you note, the professional that you've been talking to or the person you connected with might think that they did something wrong, or maybe that you're just not interested in what they have to offer, their experiences. So do you have to write a thank you note for every single person that you meet and network with? No. But the ones that you really make that connection with, or who could potentially be a connection for you, or just a good person to talk to and ask questions to and bounce ideas off of with, definitely it never hurts to follow up with them. So in this next piece, I have a sample thank you note letter that I won't read verbatim, but essentially as I'm talking, you can kind of scan through this. But it's saying, you know, thank you for taking the time to talk to me. It's connecting the person back to where you met, saying that you enjoyed that conversation, what the conversation was about. And then it's also following through with this. I appreciate your recommendation of participating in a job shadow with experience. So like that recommendation that they provided and that you're actually following through with that commitment. And then recapping, just saying this is a great conversation, and then ending with a question, because then it allows that opportunity for you to be able to continue the dialogue past that initial conversation. So this is just a good example to give you an idea of a thank you note that you can write. So you've learned about communication. We followed up with those pieces. The last piece that I want to talk about is social media. That is so that, I mean, everybody is on some form of social media today. There's hardly anyone I know that isn't on something, whether it's Instagram, LinkedIn, Facebook, Twitter. It's such a big part of our society today. And so it's important to discuss the etiquette around that. So over 90% of employers screen candidates' social media profile, and nearly 70% of employers have rejected a candidate based on what they saw on social media. So although social media is a great way for us to connect and network, it also can hinder us if we're not mindful in how we're using it. Employers are not just looking for blatantly bad behavior when they're going on social media. They want to make sure that you're a good fit for the team and for the culture. So you want to be mindful of what content's out there, especially the content that that employers or people might be able to see through mutual friends, connections, or followers. So you want to check your viewing rights that you're providing your friends and your networks, and you want to be mindful of your privacy settings. You want to see what is seen by all, and what is, and then also be able to limit some visibility by friends. You want to look at your activity log, like on Facebook, and review past history, delete any offensive photos or posts. You can also use the feature in Facebook, the View As feature, to see what your profile will look like to other people. So that's some things that I would recommend trying to do. You want to be just overall mindful of the viewing rights, and that you're putting a positive professional image of yourself out there. It doesn't mean that you want to put a false identity of who you are. You still want to be genuine and natural in who you are, but you also just want to be mindful of what pictures you're choosing to post, because that first impression of what your profile picture looks like or your cover photo looks like can really make or break potential future jobs. So with all of that being said, I think that pretty much wraps it up for any questions that we might have.
Okay, thank you, Elizabeth. That was awesome. I know I took away a lot of information there as well, and as a young adult, I know that this will benefit me and would have benefited me even more at the beginning of my career, so that was great. I'm going to go ahead and open it up for questions. I'll take a look here and see if we have any. As I'm waiting to see if any questions come in, there are a couple things that I jotted down based on the information you shared that I know I have found helpful in my own career experience and professionalism. One is to always write things down. You know, I know from the day one of a job, one of the things I always do is get a notebook, a fresh notebook, where I can take down notes from conversations with colleagues, and make sure that I'm really digesting the information and then doing something with it. So where you mentioned that follow-up piece. So I think writing things down, and I know nowadays people are in our generation are more familiar with, or more comfortable, I should say, with technology, so putting things on the computer or whatnot, or putting it into their phone, and I think that's okay, but as long as you're just really clear on, you know, I'm on my computer, taking notes, not just I'm on my computer, half listening to you, half looking at social media. And then I was just thinking another thing I remember I was taught when I first started my career was to always acknowledge email communication. You know, I think it goes a long way when someone sends you an email to at least say like, thanks, got it, or let them know where you are in your follow-up. That's something I noticed, you know, people don't always do nowadays, and I think that really shows a sign of maturity and professional development. So just a couple of tips that I was thinking as you were going along.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for sharing those. I completely agree with those as well. So
yeah. So it looks like we do have a couple questions that came in through the chat function, so I'll go ahead and share those with you now. So the first one is, what can a young person with little to no experience do to create a resume? So any tips for kind of what you can put on a resume when you don't have experience?
Sure, yeah, that's an excellent question. Because you know, you got to start somewhere, right? And it can be really daunting when you know you have to create a resume and say, well, what I haven't had a job, so what possible, you know, what are even things I start with? And my recommendation would be to stop and think about any time where you've had to show initiative or have been given or taken on a certain responsibility. So that could be doing yard care work or helping shoveling during the winter. It could be taking on some type of volunteer opportunity. Maybe you've done babysitting before. That could be something else, dog walking. Maybe you've offered to be a mentor, or you've been on some type of committee. Those are all different things that are extremely relevant and important that you can put on a resume to help start that process. So those are some things that I would say to help you out with starting off, putting on the resume. So.
Yeah, that's great. And I'll just add, in thinking about our community, if you've ever volunteered at camp, maybe you've been a junior counselor, or, you know, just generally assumed more responsibility there. You know, maybe you've helped your local member organization as a volunteer at an event, or gone to their office and done some, you know, stuffed envelopes or whatnot. So those are just a couple things specific to the bleeding disorders community that might be beneficial.
Yeah, excellent. Yeah.
Awesome. So just another question here. Someone's wondering, how long should a resume and or cover letter be? They said, I've heard that they should be no more than a page. Is this accurate? You know, if it's hard to cut it down, do you have any tips for that?
Yeah, I would say, especially starting out, no more than a page for both your cover letter and your resume. You really have to keep in mind that employers are seeing hundreds, sometimes thousands of these. You know, the job market can be challenging to get through. And so if you're giving someone a 2-page resume and you're drawing out things and you're writing all your accolades on your cover letter, that's not gonna bode well. So definitely keep it to a page. As you gain more and more experience, it makes it harder to keep the resume to 1 page. I'd say in general, keep the cover letter to 1 page. And if you can fit full information on full 2 pages of a resume as you navigate, with the more experience you have, then I think in some cases a 2-page resume could work. But I really would say, yeah, 1 page is best. And if you're having a hard time, cut it down. Utilize your friends, your network, your community to read through those pieces and give you suggestions of ways you can cut pieces down. Because sometimes we want to say it all in a lot of words, and often someone else looking at it can help you say all you want to say, but in fewer words.
Awesome. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I know my own experience too, the longer that I've been in my career, I do have more than a page on my resume. So I really look at what a job description is and, look at what my experience is and think about what's relevant. And so, putting on information that's relevant to a job as opposed to just everything that you have once you do have more than a page.
Yes, that is so crucial. With resumes and cover letters, always look at the job description. Always be mindful of what I actually do is go through the job description and highlight the key components of the job. And then I look at my resume and cover letter and make sure that those key phrases and words from the job description are included in my resume and cover letter. And that's a good way to be more concise and make sure that it matches for each of the positions you're applying to. A general resume and cover letter typically doesn't work as well because they can tell that you've generalized it. When you show that personal touch, it really makes a difference.
That's a great suggestion. So thank you for that. And then just one last question here. It looks like someone asked, do you have any tips for nervous networkers or introverts?
Yeah, so networking, like I said earlier, networking can be a really overwhelming and daunting word. I think, I hold true to where I said practice, practice, practice. The biggest thing is, while you are practicing, find people you're comfortable with to have those conversations. Maybe for some people, it's asking yourself, like, tell me about yourself. You could start with writing it down. Find a forum that helps you start processing and thinking about how you want to articulate yourself to others when you are put in that situation. And so you have a better idea. But the other thing too is, it doesn't hurt to try. So when you're in situations, maybe find a partner or a buddy that you can go to for different networking events, or a friend or colleague that you can go with, that you're comfortable with, and they can help you in those different conversations. That can be another way to help with that nervousness of networking. I'm trying to think of other things. I mean, those are some, I guess, more or less initial tips to think about with networking. I don't know if you have something else, Sarah, that you would add in there as well.
Yeah, I was thinking from an advocacy perspective, we do a lot of public speaking and networking with people. And I know one thing that usually helps me is to kind of have a standard opener or an icebreaker. So, one of the things I usually ask people is where you're from, or, tell me a little bit more about kind of your background. And I know for me, my hometown is something that I'm really proud of, and I like to talk about it with people, and it usually yields itself to other conversation. And then I can kind of talk a little bit about my own road to, how I got to where I am now. And I think that's something that people can really relate to. So, that's just one example, but I think having kind of a standard question, even just talking about the weather, it's a good icebreaker. It's relatable. Everyone has an opinion on it. And so, if you kind of go in with that, that usually helps ease you into a conversation. And then you can use that to then facilitate, other discussion from there.
Yeah, and that actually, you made me think of another point. Going back to the example I've talked about a couple times, for me, when I was starting out with the networking piece, this presenter that I went up to at the end, I felt very comfortable in a one-on-one conversation in more or less a closed room instead of a big open networking event. So I first sat through her presentation and learned about a focus area that is important to her, something that she has done. And then I was able to go up to her after, and during her presentation, I wrote down some comments. So when I went up to her at the end, I was able to reflect back and say, thank you so much for your presentation. This was really helpful. And I brought up a couple examples of takeaways I was going to bring back to my institution from what she had mentioned in her presentation. So it was a compliment to her and the work that she was doing. And then I said, I'd be really interested to learn, I'm looking to go into the field of higher education. I'm really interested to learn about how you got to where you are today. Can you tell me a little bit, about yourself and your journey? And do you have any recommendations for me? And so it put me in a situation where I was comfortable. It wasn't, a loud environment, and I was able to take the time to think about constructive questions and relevant questions to connect to her on more of a one-on-one basis. So for some people, that might be an easier way to do it than in the reception area. So.
Yeah, absolutely. And especially I think that relates back to, being an introvert. Something like that might be better suited to someone who's a little bit more nervous in a large setting.
Yes,
so,
yeah.
Right.
So,
awesome. So yeah, it looks like those are all the questions that we have.
Great.
Wonderful. Well, Alyssa, do you mind sharing your contact information for folks who might be interested in following up with you and asking additional information later?
Yes, yeah. So thank you all for listening today. It's been a pleasure to be able to talk to you all about professionalism. My contact information is right here, Elizabeth de Grandpré. You can email me at eedegrandpre@smcm.edu. I'd be happy to answer any questions that you have. Please don't hesitate to reach out.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And Elizabeth, if you don't mind just staying on the line in case we do have any last minute questions that come in.
Sure.
But now I'm going to transition over to make me the presenter again. And I'll go ahead and share a little bit more on resources for continuing education on this topic. Okay, so HFA has a lot of great resources for people at all stages in your career. And we especially have some really good stuff on disclosure, which I know is a big thing for folks at starting off in your career, whether or not to share that you have a bleeding disorder. So I wanted to have this available as part of tonight's Hangout. So I'll just kind of go through the list here. So the first thing that we have is our employment issues toolkit. And for this, it's comprised of a lot of different resources relating to employment issues. It has it contains information on the Americans with Disabilities Act or the ADA, job training, and again, disclosure. So it's kind of a one-stop shop for things relating to employment. And then we have a Hangout from a few years ago that reviews how to create a budget, ways to live within your means, tricks and tips to build an emergency fund, how to use a credit card responsibly, effective ways to paying off debt, and then it also includes some information on health insurance terminology, and that's our financial planning Hangout. So I definitely recommend that for folks who are new to their career. And then we have another Hangout called Transitioning to Adulthood. And for this one, you can learn more about your rights as an employee with a bleeding disorder. You can hear from young adults about how they have disclosed a bleeding disorder themselves, whether it be at work or school, tips on how to work with your college or university when you have a chronic condition. There's some really good resources out there, including offices for people who have disabilities or need other support. So check that out. There are, again, some really good stuff on our past Hangout series. And then we also put together a Hangout on maintaining boundaries, which reviews employment within the bleeding disorders community. So these are all available if you go to HFA's YouTube page, or you can find them on our website. When we post this Hangout, I'll also include them in the description of the Hangout on YouTube, so you can look for them there. But I would say the biggest thing is that, definitely take advantage of the resources that are available to you. We want to support you in the best way that we can, and so we try to do that through multiple means that reach people at all stages. In addition to resources, we also have an opportunity for folks who might be interested in spending a summer living and working in Washington, D.C. So we are looking for a summer intern for 2018. For this, you can gain experience in policy and government relations, make connections that last a lifetime, especially for that networking expertise to use, and you'll have an opportunity to learn more about how a national nonprofit is run, and how we work with local organizations. So for folks who might be interested in applying for our summer internship, you can find application instructions on our website, hemophiliafed.org. And just another note that interns do need to live in DC for about 10 weeks in the summer. It's May to August. And we do ask that folks who are over 21 apply. We typically look for recent college graduates from the bleeding disorders community, and folks who have a demonstrated interest in policy, government relations, and advocacy. So another opportunity there. And then I also wanted to share a little bit more about our upcoming symposium in Cleveland, Ohio, April 26th to the 29th. For those who might not be familiar with Symposium, it's an annual community-centered education event where we bring together hundreds of members from the bleeding disorders community to share information, learn new advancements, and build a network of support. And each year we offer travel scholarships to first-time attendees who need financial assistance. So if you're interested in learning more about Symposium, you can log onto our website. We typically do a session for young adults specifically, and this year we're going to be including a social event for young adults to get together and share more information about their own experiences and network with one another. So definitely check that out. All right, so next, I want to say thanks again for participating in tonight's Hangout. We really appreciate you taking the time to listen to this information. I know it's been really valuable from my own perspective, and so a big thanks to Elizabeth for taking the time to be with us this evening. I'll go ahead and just do a final call for questions. Let me take a look and see if we have anything that comes up on our chat.
While you're looking, I just want to note that internship opportunity sounds phenomenal for someone to be able to partake in. So if there's anyone that is part of this webinar or is listening to this webinar at other opportunities, I know, Sarah has our contact information here. Feel free to reach out to me if you want me to look at your resume or cover letter, just have overall questions about internship opportunities. I'd be more than happy to discuss that further. So
awesome. Thank you, Elizabeth. That's awesome. So it looks like we don't have any additional questions. So with that, I'll just go ahead and wrap up. If anyone has follow-up, whether it be from this Hangout or has ideas for other Hangouts or resources that would be valuable to you, feel free to reach out to me at s.shinkman@hemophiliafed.org. And we definitely welcome your input. That's one of the best ways that we're able to then put out more resources to you all in the community. So thanks again to Elizabeth for an excellent presentation, and for everyone who's watching this session. As always, you can watch HFA Hangout series and other webinars that we produce by our YouTube channel. You can subscribe to it so you don't miss any upcoming presentations that we have. So thanks again, and we'll look forward to keeping in touch. Have a great evening, everyone. Take care.